It's not yours anymore. It's subject to a lien.
Get your hands off my tractor. That tractor was paid for before you were born.
Mr. Thorne, you were notified repeatedly.
You sent letters to land that doesn't belong to you.
According to our records, it does.
What would you do if a group of strangers suddenly claimed they owned the rules to your family's 200-year-old legacy and then had the audacity to steal your livelihood right off your own dirt? Imagine waking up to find that a community board you never joined has decided your ancestral home is an eyesore and that your essential tools are now unauthorized debris. Stick around. The most surprising part happens just a little later, and you'll want to watch until the end because it gets even more unbelievable. Welcome to Honor-Bound Tales, a place where we stand up for the underdog and celebrate those who fight for what's right. Before we get deep into this battle of soil versus suburban spite, please take a moment to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment your location below so we can know how far our stories go across the world. Stay with us. The twist at the end is worth it. The story belongs to Elias Thorne, a man whose hands were as weathered and reliable as the 140 acres he called Thorn Ridge. For 5 generations, the Thornes had worked this land, surviving the Dust Bowl, the Great Depression, and the slow encroachment of modern development. To Elias, the farm wasn't just property, it was a living, breathing member of his family. The farmhouse was a sturdy, whitewashed structure built in 1842, and the barn housed equipment that spanned decades of agricultural history. There was the modern harvester he'd saved years for, but there was also his grandfather's 1954 John Deere tractor, a bright green relic that still purred like a kitten and was used for the smaller vegetable patches. Life was quiet, honest, and governed by the rising sun until the Meadows arrived. The Meadows was a luxury subdivision that sprouted up on the eastern border of Elias's land like a patch of invasive weeds. It was all beige siding, manicured lawns that looked like plastic, and people who moved to the country but seemed to hate everything about it. Leading the charge for the Meadows was a woman named Brenda Higgins, the president of their newly formed homeowners association. Brenda was the kind of person who treated a clipboard like a holy relic and a ruler like a weapon of war. For the first year, Elias ignored them. He was polite when he saw them, though he rarely did, as his driveway was nearly a quarter-mile long. But then, the letters started arriving. At first, Elias thought they were sent to the wrong address. They were notices of non-compliance regarding aesthetic disturbances. The HOA claimed that his rusted machinery, referring to his working farm equipment, was visible from the second-story windows of their Executive Series homes and was driving down property values. Keep watching. The story takes an unexpected turn soon because Elias didn't just throw those letters away. He kept them as a record of their insanity. Elias tried to be neighborly. He walked over to the HOA's monthly meeting at their clubhouse, a building that looked like a Greek temple made of plywood. He stood in the back in his work boots and overalls, waiting for his turn to speak. When he finally got to the podium, he explained that Thorn Ridge was a working farm, not a backyard garden. He told them the property had been there since before the county was even fully incorporated, and that he was not, nor had he ever been, a member of their association. Brenda Higgins didn't even look up from her notes. She told him that under a newly discovered annexation clause in the county records, his northern 40 acres and the primary homestead had been absorbed into the HOA's jurisdiction to ensure community standards. Elias laughed, a deep, booming sound that made the suburbanites flinch. He told them he had his deed in a fireproof safe, and it didn't mention any HOA. He left that meeting thinking that would be the end of it. He was wrong. A week later, Elias found a bright orange sticker plastered to the side of his grain silo. It was a notice of lien. The Meadows HOA claimed he owed over $15,000 in unpaid fines for habitual aesthetic violations and unauthorized agricultural activity. Wait until you see how the HOA reacts when Elias ignores this, too. It's shocking. Elias called his lawyer, a man named Miller, who was old and sharp as a jagged flint. But before Miller could even file a response, the situation escalated from annoying to criminal. One Tuesday morning, while Elias was out in the back pasture checking on a fence line, he heard the heavy, grinding sound of diesel engines coming from his main barn. He hopped on his ATV and raced back, his heart hammering against his ribs. When he rounded the corner, he saw two massive flatbed tow trucks. They were backing up to his 1954 John Deere and his primary transport truck. Brenda Higgins was there, standing on his gravel driveway like she owned the place, flanked by two men in suits. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Elias roared, skidding to a halt. Brenda didn't flinch. She pointed to a piece of paper in her hand. "We are executing a private seizure to satisfy the lien, Mr. Thorne. These vehicles are in violation of Article 4, Section 2 of the HOA bylaws regarding abandoned or unsightly machinery. Since you've refused to pay the fines or move them behind a fence, we are impounding them." Elias stared at her, physically shaking with rage. "This is private property. This is a farm. You can't just tow a tractor from a barn." He tried to step between the tow truck and his equipment, but one of the men in suits stepped forward, identifying himself as a compliance officer and warning Elias that interfering would result in a call to the sheriff. "Don't go anywhere. The next moment changes everything." As the tow trucks began to winch his grandfather's tractor onto the bed, Elias realized that the local sheriff's office was likely being fed a story by Brenda's compliance team. The tow truck drivers, likely contracted from 2 towns over and told they were dealing with a foreclosed property, ignored Elias's protests. He watched, helpless, as his tools of life were hauled away down the long gravel road he had paved himself. The silence that settled over the farm afterwards was deafening. He went inside, sat at his kitchen table, and stared at the empty spot where the John Deere had sat for 70 years. Brenda thought she had won. She thought she had broken a stubborn old man and forced him to fall in line. What she didn't realize was that by touching his equipment and stepping onto his land without a legal right, she had just opened a door she would never be able to close. The next morning, Elias didn't go to the farm. He went to the county archives. He spent 8 hours with a magnifying glass and a historian named Sarah who lived for old maps. They didn't just look at his deed, they looked at the original land grants from the 1800s. You won't believe who steps in to defend them as the research unfolds. It turns out that when the developers of the Meadows bought the land next to him, they had used a map that was slightly misaligned. Not only was Elias not in the HOA, but a significant portion of the HOA's common green space, including their fancy clubhouse and 3 of their most expensive homes, was actually sitting on land that belonged to the Thorne estate. The annexation clause Brenda had cited was a forgery, a desperate attempt to cover up a massive surveying error made by the developers. Elias didn't call Brenda, he didn't yell, he went home and waited for the mail. 2 days later, a second notice arrived, this one demanding another $5,000 for storage fees for his seized equipment. The HOA was emboldened, thinking they had him on the ropes. They even sent a landscaping crew to trim the hedges along his driveway, which they claimed were overgrown. Elias watched from the porch, sipping coffee, as they hacked away at bushes his mother had planted 40 years ago. He was waiting for one thing, the arrival of the final demand letter. He knew Brenda couldn't help herself. She wanted the land. She wanted the ridge part of Thorne Ridge for a new phase of development. What happens after they get the notice? You'll have to see it to believe it. When the letter finally came, it wasn't just a fine, it was a formal notice of intent to foreclose on the lien and take possession of the homestead. Brenda Higgins had signed it herself with a flourish of blue ink. Elias picked up his phone and made one call to Miller, his lawyer. "It's time," Elias said. "Bring the surveyor, the sheriff, and the heavy equipment. We're going to collect some non-compliance fees of our own." The stage was set for a confrontation that would be talked about in that county for the next century. Brenda thought she was playing a game of suburban politics, but she had actually picked a fight with a man who knew every stone, every boundary, and every law governing the earth she was standing on. Keep watching. The story takes an unexpected turn soon. The sun hadn't even fully cleared the horizon when Elias Thorne began the process of reclaiming his legacy. While the residents of the Meadows were just beginning to brew their artisanal coffee, Elias was meeting with lawyer Miller and a team of state-certified surveyors at the very edge of his property. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Elias wasn't just there to get his tractor back. He was there to remind the world that some things, like the roots of an old oak or the boundaries of a 200-year-old farm, cannot be moved by the whims of a suburban committee. Don't go anywhere. The next moment changes everything. The surveyors began their work with laser precision, cross-referencing the original 1842 land grants with the modern GPS coordinates. As they hammered the first of many bright pink stakes into the manicured lawn of the HOA's common green, a few early morning joggers stopped to stare. They had no idea that the ground beneath their expensive sneakers was about to become a legal battlefield. By 10 o'clock that morning, the survey was complete, and the results were even more staggering than Elias had hoped. It wasn't just a small overlap. The developers of the Meadows, in their rush to maximize profit, had fundamentally misread the topographical markers. The HOA clubhouse, the swimming pool, and the entire front yards of houses 114, 116, and 118 were sitting squarely on Thorne property. Elias had spent decades letting them be, simply because he valued his peace more than a few acres of grass, but Brenda Higgins had changed the rules of engagement. If she wanted to use the law as a bludgeon, Elias would show her that the law had a much heavier side. Stay with us. The twist at the end is worth it, as the compliance officer is about to find out what true non-compliance looks like. Elias, Miller, and a deputy sheriff, who was there to ensure peace was kept, marched toward the HOA clubhouse. Inside, Brenda Higgins was leading a beautification committee meeting, likely planning which colors of mulch would be banned for the upcoming season. The heavy oak doors swung open, and Elias stepped in, his boots thudding against the polished marble floor. Brenda looked up, her expression shifting from annoyance to a smug grin. "Mr. Thorne, if you're here to pay your fines, you'll need to speak with the treasurer in the back," she said, not even bothering to stand. Elias didn't say a word. He simply nodded to Miller, who stepped forward and laid a thick stack of papers on the conference table. "We aren't here to pay fines, Mrs. Higgins," Miller said, his voice calm and clinical. "We are here to serve you with a formal notice of ejectment and a suit for trespass, grand larceny, and slander of title. Furthermore, we are here to inform you that this building is currently trespassing on private property." The room went dead silent. The ladies of the committee looked at each other in confusion, but Brenda's grin faltered. "That's absurd," she sputtered. "This land was surveyed 5 years ago." Miller pointed out the window toward the pink stakes. "Your developers used a 1990 county map that contained a clerical error. We went back to the original 1842 grant. This clubhouse, your pool, and 3 of your residential streets are on Thorne land. And since you've seen fit to place a lien on Mr. Thorne's farm, a property you have 0 jurisdiction over, we are reciprocating. As of this morning, a lien has been placed on this entire facility, and we are seeking a court order to have these structures demolished if a settlement isn't reached within 48 hours. Keep watching. The twist at the end is worth it, as the homeowners realize their board has led them into a financial abyss." Brenda tried to call for security, but the deputy sheriff stepped forward. "Actually, Brenda, Mr. Thorne is the one who called me. I'm here to oversee the return of his property. You have 1 hour to produce the location of the 1954 John Deere and the transport truck, or I'm taking you down to the station for possession of stolen property." The next part completely changes the way this story feels. The news traveled through the Meadows like a wildfire. Homeowners began pouring out of their houses, gathered around the pink stakes, realizing that their property lines were a lie. The panic was palpable. People who looked down on Elias for his unsightly farm now realized that he technically owned their front porches. Brenda was frantic, her polished exterior crumbling as she realized the lien she had placed on Elias was the spark that was burning down her own house. Under the watchful eye of the sheriff, the tow company that had seized Elias's equipment was forced to bring it back. When the flatbed arrived and the green 1954 John Deere was lowered back onto the gravel of Thorn Ridge, Elias walked over and ran his hand along the fender. It was scratched and a light was broken. He didn't yell, he just looked at Miller. "Add it to the bill," he said. The ending will surprise you. Stay tuned to see how the neighborhood finally revolts against their own HOA. The following 48 hours were a whirlwind of legal chaos. The insurance companies for the homeowners were calling the HOA's legal team in a frenzy. The developer was suddenly unavailable for comment, but Elias had all the cards. He didn't want to tear down people's homes. He wasn't a monster, but he did want the HOA gone. He made a one-time offer. He would grant an easement to the homeowners for their land, and he would drop the lawsuit for the clubhouse under 3 conditions. First, Brenda Higgins and the entire board had to resign and be barred from serving again. Second, the HOA had to pay triple the value of the storage and towing fees for compensation for the stress and damage to his equipment. And third, and most importantly, the HOA had to sign a permanent, irrevocable boundary agreement that recognized Thorn Ridge as a sovereign agricultural preserve, exempt from any and all future HOA interference, regardless of who owned the neighboring land. Wait until you see how the HOA reacts when the homeowners finally get a look at the books. It turned out Brenda had been using the fines collected from people, including the illegal fines she tried to get from Elias, to fund a private legal defense fund that was essentially a slush fund for her own projects. The community was livid. At an emergency meeting that Friday, the residents didn't just ask for Brenda's resignation, they demanded a full audit. Brenda was escorted out of the clubhouse she had fought so hard to build, passing Elias on the way. He was sitting on his porch, watching the sunset, his grandfather's tractor parked proudly in the driveway, reflecting the golden light. He didn't even look at her as she drove away for the last time. He had his peace back, and he had secured the future of the ridge for another 5 generations. Have you ever had an HOA experience like this? Let us know in the comments. It's truly amazing how a little bit of power can turn a neighbor into a tyrant, but it's even more amazing how the truth, when dug up from the dirt, can set things right. If this story feels familiar, leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts on whether Elias should have gone further and actually made them move the clubhouse. Hit like if you think this farmer deserves a medal for standing up to the suburban machine. Your support helps us tell these stories of resilience and justice. Share this story with a neighbor or friend who'd enjoy a good triumph over the HOA tale. Maybe it will give someone the courage to check their own property lines. Before we head out, you won't believe who steps in to defend them in our other videos. Make sure to check out the HOA Karen Stories playlist appearing on your screen right now. We have stories of malicious compliance that will make your jaw drop, and more tales of long-held family secrets that saved homes from the wrecking ball. Thank you for joining us today at Honor-Bound Tales. We believe that a man's home is his castle, whether it's a modern mansion or a 200-year-old farm, and we'll always be here to tell the stories of those who defend their walls. Stay tuned for our next episode, where a small-town baker takes on a corporate fast food giant that tried to steal her secret recipe. You won't want to miss it. Until next time, keep your fences high and your deeds in the safe. See you in the next story.